Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. How are you doing today? So great to be with you. I really mean that. You are awesome. Thanks for being a loyal subscriber to the show. This week is going to be great. You're going to love it. You have heard me talk about marathons in the past. I think marathoning is a great metaphor for building the life of our dreams and growing elite companies. But sometimes marathoning isn't just a metaphor. Sometimes you have the opportunity to sit down with a real-life competitor, and sometimes the competitor inspires you to higher levels of goal achievement, like today's guest, Dick Traum. In 1965, Dick was the victim in a traumatic car accident that resulted in the amputation of his right leg. 10 years later, he became the first ever amputee runner to cross the finish line in the New York City Marathon, one of the most difficult and famous marathons in the world. In 1983, Dick founded Achilles International, whose organizational mission is to enable people with all types of disabilities to participate in mainstream running events. Today, Achilles has more than 110 chapters in 41 countries. And earlier this year, Dick teamed up with David Cordani, the president and CEO of Cigna, the global health service company, to release the new book, The Courage to Go Forward, The Power of Micro Communities. Dick, it's so good to have you on the show today. How are you today?
I am great. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
This is going to be an exciting episode. I'm very energized to jump into this. But before we do, give us a little background on who you are.
Okay, going back many, many years ago, graduated school. I have a BS, an MBA, a PhD. My PhD was in industrial psych. After graduating school, I worked with Celanese for 6 years and developed my skill. I went into management consulting, and I did that for 30 years. And the interest was in how do you provide quantitative analysis in the human resource function. In 1976, I ran my first marathon on an artificial leg. It was the greatest day of my life. And some years later, I founded Achilles. And the idea was to provide people who had disabilities the thrill and the excitement that I had had. And we've grown from 6 people doing the New York City Marathon in 1983, which was unbelievable, to somewhere around 300 doing New York in a few weeks.
That's incredible. And take us back to that very first marathon in 1976, because I would imagine, here you are, the very first person doing this. There might have been some obstacles, some challenges, not just physical, but, emotional, mental, and culturally that you had to stand up against to really pull this off. So take us back there and let's talk about that a bit.
Well, never been done before. The longest I had run prior to this was 18.7 miles, 30 kilometers. And I was worried about this 20-mile wall. And I was just wondering, perhaps I'd get to 20 miles and all of a sudden I would be stopped and I just could not go anymore. And I was concerned about it. I was also concerned about the chafing of the artificial leg on my residual limb. Would it hold up for the 26 miles? And sure, I was very, very nervous.
How about the other competitors? I mean, was it culturally, it was a different experience for you, for them to see, someone with a disability that's, going to take on this huge feat? How were the other competitors?
Well, I started with the New York Roadrunners support 4 hours early. So somewhere around 19 miles, the other competitors caught up to me, and they treated me as one would have treated Horatio Alger. In other words, it was just tremendous support. Way to go, congratulations, thumbs up, tremendous support.
What a great experience and a great learning lesson for all of us. I mean, there are challenges in every walk of life and everything that we try to do, and we just got to take the bull by the horns and really go after it. And so what a great example. And so take us now to today. You've teamed up with David and you've written this great new book. Why now? Why take the time to put this out? And what's important about it for us to read today?
Well, David and I are both very much interested in achieving. And what's been happening is that there are many people who are out there who are doing things that you would say are impossible, or things that had never ever been done by anybody before. And we're trying to figure out what's going on there. Why are these people able to do these impossible things? And we thought about it, we talked about it, and we say, oh, it's the group, or it's really the micro community. The reason that you can achieve these things is because you become part of a group and you have that interaction.
So you use the terminology micro communities, and define that a little bit for us.
The micro community can be a two-person situation, like, David running with someone. It can be a small group of a few people who go out on a Tuesday evening to run, or it can be a group of 50 or 75 people who work out on a Saturday morning with Achilles. It's a situation where you have more than one person doing something. It's a group effect.
Well, why is the group effect so vitally important as we start to tackle our goals and our challenges in life?
Because what it does is it gives you feedback, so that you go out and you run 5 miles and there's someone with you who says, gee, that is great. There's someone you can get who gives you the lift, who gives you the inspiration, who competes with you, who makes life more interesting.
So we've got the feedback, but talk to me a little bit about the accountability that happens. We're big goal setters and goal achievers here on the Modern Leadership Podcast. I mean, the listeners here go after their goals. And tell me about how this micro community helps us in the accountability arena.
Well, what this does is it helps us form goals. And sometimes the goals are competitive goals, so that you're with a small group and one of your members just did a 20-mile event. And you're saying, gee, I wonder if I could do that. Or someone broke 5 hours in a marathon, and you're saying, boy, that is really terrific. Maybe I can do that. So that the small group or the micro community gives you, increases your level of aspiration.
I've been sharing with the audience a little bit, Dick, that I just recently started taking spin classes. I hadn't done it before, and about 6-8 weeks ago, I got on the bike for the first time, and now I'm somewhat obsessed. I do it a couple of times a week, and last night I went out and I went to this spin class, and there was only about 8 of us in the class, a very small class. Sometimes we have 50, 60, but last night there was only 8 of us, and the way they have the bike set up is they have the watts, which measures how much resistance, how much effort you're putting in, and they have the speed, the RPM, the number of rotations per minute. And they project this up on the screen so everybody in the room can basically see how everybody else is doing. And I remember last night, there was this guy sitting next to me his watts were up in, over 300. And every time I'd see his watts go to 300, it would push me and drive me to go, to the next level, to go above that. And so, I can see this power of being around this micro community. And sometimes this community is formed naturally. I mean, we just all showed up for a class and there we were. Sometimes we have to be intentional about it. So tell me, Dick, why do we need to start thinking differently about how we do goal setting? In particular, why do we need to think differently about goal achievement today?
Well, I think that the trick is having a norm, and the norm is beating the other person in the spinning program. The norm is trying to do something that has never been done before. You have a PR, you have, look how I'm improving. And what's happening basically is others are giving you affection.
What do you mean by giving you affection?
They're applauding you. They're, bravo, way to go, looking good. In other words, you're getting good positive feedback from others. Or you can get negative feedback, which makes you go faster also. Gee, how come you're so slow? Why can't you get it up to 300 calories? But it's the interaction that's a very, very, very important factor in terms of motivation.
It's a very interesting thought that you're talking about. You've got basically this balance between, being supported through getting positive or even negative feedback to drive you a little bit further. But you're also, experiencing this in a community where I'm a big believer you become part of what you're around. And when you surround yourself with achievers, when you surround yourself with goal setters and goal accomplishers, you find yourself being drawn with that energy after them. Do you not?
Yes, that is the micro community. So we talk about running the New York City Marathon. There are over 1 million people out there running. And you notice that when the crowds are large and when the crowds are applauding, that you do better than when the crowds are very, very thin. One of the things that I do is I warn our athletes that going down First Avenue, the crowds are very, very steep and they're shouting their heads off, and don't go too fast because there are going to be spots when you get into the Bronx where there aren't going to be too many people, and you'll be devastated. So just pace yourself and save yourself for some of the parts where it's more quiet. But the roar of the crowds is a tremendous motivator, and this is, in a sense, a community.
It's an interesting thought. I said in the intro that I use marathoning a lot of times as a metaphor for business life and business success. And one of the things that I talk about is you need to identify your mid-marathon water station. So what you're talking about is, you're heading down Fifth Avenue, and that's where all the people are. That's where all the excitement, the loud music, the cheering, the signs, the energy is there. But then you're going to come at some point at mile 10, 12, 18, 15, 19, where you're just by yourself, where you're running down a quiet street and it's really you and the battle that you're facing. And you need to identify for yourself what that mid-marathon water station is, where you could stop, get a drink of water, maybe a power bar, where you can re-energize in your goal accomplishment. Because achieving a goal is not about where you start. It's about how you finish. And to finish, you got to go through what we call the messy middle. And so this is a fascinating conversation, Dick. I want to ask you a little bit about this quote from Magic Johnson. So Magic Johnson says this: "I've learned that the power of one can make a difference in someone's life, but the power of a team can make a mighty impact." And take us back. How did we get this quote from Magic Johnson?
Well, as he played basketball, when the crowd was applauding and shouting their heads off, he was better than when folks were just sitting there. In other words, the crowds were inspiring him to do better than he could possibly do. I remember, running in 1976, the last few blocks of the New York City Marathon. The crowds were so loud that I was thinking of someone carrying a football down the field and scoring a goal, and how the energy of the crowd would make me run faster and stronger. It's a very, very helpful tool.
Now, you started this journey as a marathoner, but micro-communities empower anyone. And we've been talking a lot about athletes. We've been talking about runners. We even talked about a basketball player. But this isn't just for athletes, right? I mean, this happens within our businesses. You spent 30 years, as a consultant with these big companies. Tell us, how do micro-communities affect our workplace?
Well, during the 30 years, I worked with different groups within my company. And there were a number of times when the people that I was working with within my company just energized me. And, we were solving a problem, and I could work on it more so than anyone would think was possible, because I was getting the positive feedback from others.
Now, this is something that we talk about. I mean, this is something that the people, the listeners to this podcast are learning about, understanding. Those who pick up a copy of your book, Dick, and read this are going to understand. But the general community, those around us, those that we work with, probably haven't had this training, this understanding of micro communities. So how do we impact change within our businesses, within our communities, when we're dealing with a group of people, a group of participants in this micro community that maybe don't understand the role that they play?
Well, that's a good question. I think part of it is developing a small group or a micro community that has a goal that ideally is difficult, where the group together can do things that individuals by themselves can never do. And you see this, in movies. I'm thinking of, like the bridge on the River Kwai, where you had a group of people who getting together could do something that none of them could do themselves. Part of it is the leadership. It's a process of how can we get this group of people to work together to solve a problem.
So this is the Modern Leadership Podcast. These are leaders that we're talking to. And what I hear you saying, Dick, is that we as leaders need to model. We need to understand this, and then we need to take this back into our communities, and we need to model the opportunity, that the growth that we want to see our teams. And sometimes we talk about this terminology, guided discovery, and that is helping those that we interact with, guide them, help them understand the destination that we're trying to get, and help bring them along. And in the beginning, you're going to need a little bit more encouragement. In the beginning, you're going to need a little bit more crowd cheering, maybe a little bit more noise and music. But once you get that momentum going, then all of a sudden you're going to see that your team is going to start to break off into these smaller micro communities on their own, and they're going to start working. So, Dick, while I've got you here and this opportunity to talk to one of the authors of this great book, I want to talk to you a little bit about this micro community that you formed between you and David. Now, David is obviously, he's the president and CEO of Cigna, which is a massive company, global company. He's a guy who's run 175 triathlons, maybe more than that now. This guy's a real achiever, a go-getter. How did you guys get together? How did you team up and then get this book written?
Have been working together, but not directly, for about 10 years. And what happened was Cigna sponsored a race in Falmouth, Mass. It was a road race, a famous road race, Falmouth, Massachusetts. And they invited us to bring some of our kids. And we have a major program for kids with disabilities. We have 12,000 kids. And we sent a few people up there, and it was just a nice relationship, and we became friends, and we built on that. And a few years later, Cigna invited us to participate in the Disney half marathon and other events, which they sponsor. And again, it's just a relationship where David and I, probably the biggest thing in our lives is the concept of achievement. What can we do? And there's a certain fun to it. And it just evolved very, very slowly over time. And then David was out there running marathons with a number of our double amputees. Now, if you have two artificial legs and you're running 26 miles, it's very honestly impossible. But when these folks tied in with David, they were able to do it. And it was really the micro community, or the dyad, David and this runner, that made something that really isn't possible. And not only was it great for the athlete, but it was also great for David, because he was able to do something that he had never been able to do before. He was able to encourage someone to do the impossible. He got feedback. My goodness gracious, not only am I a national class triathlete, but I'm also somebody who can motivate others. Let me go back a couple of minutes to something we were talking about. And the question was, how do you inspire the group to get ahead? And the answer, my feeling about this, is the real trick is to make others in the group look good. And this is what David did.
So tell us why that's important. Why is it important to make others in the group look good?
Because when you make someone look good, they are inspired, they are motivated, they are motivated to do even better.
And this is such a shift from the way that the world is thinking and acting nowadays. And it appears to be much more of a selfish, what's in it for me attitude. And what you're talking about here is this shift in mentality, this mindset, where when you inspire other people to work good, when you inspire other people to do more and reach higher levels, you're going to get more than 1 + 1 is 2. You're going to get 1 + 1 is more than 2, because you're going to get higher effort. You're going to take people to a different level. You talk about a double amputee running 26.1 miles. Impossible. But with the inspiration, with the guidance, with the help, with the support of a micro community, this double amputee is making it to the finish line, the inspiration to drive. And then what happens? It's this trickle-down effect, because other people are watching, observing, sitting on the outside, seeing the impossible happening. And as they're seeing it happening, they're believing that they can accomplish amazing things in their life. And once that trickle down starts to happen, it starts to spread like wildfire, and people are inspired to do amazing things, which is why this book is so powerful. This book is filled with stories of people accomplishing seemingly impossible objectives, but going after it and being part of a community to accomplish it. One of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about working with David is you said you started out 10 years ago and you found some common ground. It wasn't like you approached him or he approached you and said, we need to do a book. It was you found common ground through this organization that you both were passionate about and this objective that you both saw. And because of that common ground, you worked together to really do some great things that led to this book. So tell me, how did you find time to work together to get this book actually written?
Well, I guess that David and I are basically do multitasks. And I had been playing with books for a long time. I've written a few. And I had probably 1,100 pages of stuff to, that was sitting there available to be put into a book. Just, for your sense of humor, I had about 40 pages of jokes. I think we eventually used one of the jokes.
One out of the 40 pages.
One out of the 40 pages. But I, over the years, whenever something of interest happens, I write it down in a book, in a notebook. And I have 25 years of it. And, I've kept it. And there was nothing that was ready for publication. And all of a sudden we were talking and we were talking, how is it possible that, David, how is it possible that you're getting these folks to do these great things? And I'm watching David, I'm watching him in meetings. And what he is doing in these meetings is he's not like telling others what to do. But what he's doing in these meetings that he holds is he's making other people look good. And I was just intrigued by that. And I realized that what he was doing really is he was making others look good, but he was also developing these little micro communities.
And this is pretty amazing, Dick, when you think about it. Here we have, a young CEO of a massive company who, instead of stroking his own ego, he's helping other people rise to the level, understanding that as those around you rise, you will also rise with them. And I think this is a great, important lesson as we close this out. And probably my biggest takeaway, Dick, from this discussion today, and that is, the way to rise yourself, the way to have further goal achievement and goal accomplishment for yourself personally is to surround yourself with a micro community that's moving in the same direction. When you all have the same goal, whether it's to finish a marathon or to build the best company in the world or to just create a service organization that's going to make a difference, when you surround yourself with like-minded people, when you come together and really use your expertise together, you can go further as a team than you could ever go on your own. And that's because of the feedback. That's because of the support, and it's because of the encouragement. And so this is a great book, and I wish we could go a little bit further and deeper into it. But of course, we want the listeners to go out and pick up a copy and read it themselves. And so at this point in the episode, in the podcast, I love to shift gears a little bit and talk about a section I call Learning from Leaders. How does that sound, Dick?
It sounds great.
All right. So in this section, we ask a little bit of personal to go along with our business conversation. And the first question is, what is the book that you're currently reading? What's on your Kindle or bedside table?
Well, I'm currently reading a book. It's called Unleash Different, and it's written by Rich Donovan. And Rich has cerebral palsy, and he went through an interesting, childhood and adolescence, and basically he achieved. And he is run with Achilles, and the title is Unleash Difference, but also says Achieving Business Success Through Disability. And he's good.
So I believe that everybody out there has a leadership superpower. It's something that comes out naturally when they start speaking or working. You've spent 30 years as a consultant. As you were out in the world consulting, what leadership superpower would come out in your interactions with the people that you worked with?
I guess it's inspiring, But the big thing that I tried to do, or that I did, was to make others look good.
Yeah, and this seems to be a theme for this episode, Dick. Your superpower, inspiring by making other people look good. And I would absolutely agree. I mean, how can you not be inspiring when you were the first ever participant with a amputee to cross the finish line of the New York Marathon? I mean, that right there started you on a journey of inspiration that has never ended. And you talk about, working in consulting. Consulting is really about helping other people, inspiring other people to go beyond what they can do. And so I absolutely agree with you. Inspiration is a leadership superpower. Our next question then is a personal mantra, quote, or philosophy that you live by.
I guess it would be the power of the group.
What a mantra. The power of the group. All right, Dick, our final question today. The book that you most often gift to friends, family, or colleagues.
Well, that's easy. It's a book that I wrote a few years ago, and it's called Go Achilles. And it's a 300-page book that's primarily pictures. And what it does is it covers the 5 Achilles programs. So we have the Achilles Kids. It's the Hope and Possibility Race, which is a 5-mile race where the focus is on disabled people running in a mainstream environment. It's about our huge international presence. It's about our Hope and Possibility Race. Just talking about the 3 weeks ago, the president of Mongolia came out to cheer on the Hope and Possibility Race in Ulaanbaatar, where we had 3,000 able-bodied and disabled people running. And then it's also about our marathon tour, where we have a large group of disabled athletes running in different marathons. So tomorrow, I shouldn't say tomorrow, I should say this weekend, we have a group doing Chicago, and then we have a group doing Detroit, and then the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington the week after, and finally New York. And it's the marathon tour. We have literally hundreds of disabled people running these marathons.
And the book is called Go Achilles.
It's called Go Achilles.
And where can we pick up a copy?
You can pick it up on Amazon.
Okay, definitely. We'll link it up on the show notes so they'll know exactly where to go and get it. Dick, this has been a fascinating conversation about micro communities and about inspiring others to reach their potential. Before we let you go, any last bit of advice, and how can we find out more about you?
Well, just the last bit of advice is that if you think about yourself growing, think about yourself moving from the child, who does the marathon to the adult or the parent who helps others. And I think that as you evolve into it and as you think of that, it's a very, very helpful process. If you're interested in joining Achilles, just Google Achilles International or look at our website, which is www.achillesinternational.org, or just Google my name, Dick Traum, and it will give you a lot of information.
And Dick, we're going to make it really easy for the listeners. We're going to put all of those links on the show notes for this episode. I really appreciate you coming on this morning to being our guest. We learned so much from you and sure feel inspired. Thank you for being this week's Modern Leadership Expert.
Thank you for having me.
All right, my friends, and a big thanks to Dick for coming on the show this morning and having a conversation with us about micro communities and really bringing other people together, bringing people with us together to accomplish our goals and really work together. And, the more I think about it, the more I'm reminded of the story I told. Sitting next to this guy on the cycling bike, pushing myself to go harder and faster than I normally would. And frankly, I don't know, maybe he's a professional rider. Maybe he's been riding his whole life, but I was trying to keep up with him and it was forcing me and challenging me to work a little bit harder. I think the idea of these micro communities taking us to the next level is so vitally important. Such a great conversation with Dick. And as well as the book. I'm really excited to dive into it. He sent me a copy of the book, and so I'm really looking forward to getting more into that. And of course, as we always say, everything's on the show notes. Show notes are found at jakeacarlson.com/ML98. episode 98. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life, and of course, stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.